True Techno Gamer here, back at it for another video. And before the end of the year, I just wanted to do somewhat of a follow-up to my PlayStation 5 Pro review. More so just an update, because obviously there's a lot of activity going on around the PS5 Pro. There's been a lot of new games, new patches, whatever. There's a lot to sift through. I'm not going to go into all of that. I'm not going to go by per game and whatnot. I've been playing it more. I've been testing it more. And I just wanted to give some kind of just updated opinions. I'm going to call out a couple of games and just some observations on my part, okay? Now, first of all, I think it's important to just, think about in context the difference between console and PC and how, a mid-gen refresh like the PS5 Pro really highlights those differences, right? It's kind of interesting when you think about it, okay? Now, follow me. So, fundamentally, without getting into everything, fundamentally, the user experience is different between a PC and a console when you're gaming. On a PC, right, one of the things that people love or hate about PC gaming is that the onus is on you, the gamer, to dial in the settings. You can modify pretty much everything about the game and optimize the graphics for your system. The console, the onus is typically on the developer. The developer at the studio, right, when they're making the game or patching the game or whatever, they have the responsibility to go in and optimize the game for the said platform, the said console. As the gamer, as the users, we're kind of at their mercy. When they come back and they say, well, here's a quality mode and here's a performance mode, they optimize how they see fit, right, to work on most people's, environments, in most people's system on their PS5 or Xbox or whatever. Now, in some cases, a lot of people don't like that, right? Because they may come back with some settings and we still may say, oh, the resolution is still too low, or it's, why didn't they add this feature or that feature? Or why didn't they add this ray tracing feature, right? Et cetera, et cetera. But it's not up to us. Now, one interesting thing that's happening with the PS5 Pro is that a lot of games are actually adding even more options and more settings so the user can still have some control. Why are they doing that? Because the users that care about this stuff, the target audience for the $700 PS5 Pro console are the enthusiast crowd. A lot of them have PCs and game on PCs and are used to that model of having more and more flexibility to be able to decide between frame rates, resolution, settings, ray tracing, whatever. This is why we need to be at the mercy of a developer to patch a game to take advantage of the Pro. And I'm thinking about this because I've seen a lot of kind of discussion on the internet and forums and people just kind of, getting annoyed at either the lack of updates, the lack of patches, or the bad patches in some cases, or just the fact that, again, we're just at the developer's mercy here. And people saying, well, hey, I get a new graphics card on my PC and it just works and I see the benefits or whatever. Well, yes and no, right? I mean, yes, it works and you do see the benefits, but understand what's happening here. The benefits you see when you get a new graphics card on your PC is the same deal. Get this new graphics card. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, the graphics card is twice as powerful. You get twice the performance. So you were playing a game and you dialed in the settings on your previous graphics card. You dialed in the settings to keep it at around 60 frames per second, I'm just saying, at whatever it was. Maybe it's maxed out. Maybe you had to dial something down, whatever. Now, you get this new graphics card and it's twice as powerful. So what does that mean? You pop it into your PC. If you play that same game without touching the settings, what happens? In theory, you probably will see close to 2x the frame rate, assuming the game is GPU bound and blah, blah, blah. Just follow me for my sake of this example. So you went from 60 frames per second to 120 frames per second, just like that, right? Great. But you now have extra headroom. You have 2 times the amount of GPU performance. So you may not need 120 hertz. Maybe you don't have a 120 hertz monitor or whatever. So instead of going just for 120 hertz, you go into the settings. You say, oh, now I'm going to turn this setting up to high. Now I'm going to turn this setting up to extreme. Now I'm just going to try to max out the game and see, right? You still get the chance to do that. That's what's happening. The PS5 Pro is effectively a graphics card update for the PlayStation 5. I'm simplifying a bit, but pretty much that's what it is from a hardware perspective. When you get the PS5 Pro and you run a game on it, guess what? It will be improved, no matter what game it is. For the most part, it will be improved. That's what Sony calls Game Boost. Now, in order for Game Boost to really work and for you to see or feel the improvements, something that has been a staple of console gaming for the last 3 or 4 decades has to go away. And that thing is locked frame rates for the most part. See, on a PC, by and large, frame rates are unlocked, which means that if you get a new GPU and it has more performance, you can see that. If you had a GPU before and you locked the frame rate at 60 and the GPU before was already running at 60 and you get this new GPU, guess what? You're not going to see the difference, right? If the frame rate is locked at 60, the game is still going to be running at 60, and which the other GPU was already powerful enough to do. So you're not going to really see a difference. If the frame rate is unlocked, now you can say, oh, it was running around 60 before, but now I can see that it can get to 120, right? You see what I'm saying? Historically, that wasn't a thing in the console space. When the PS4 Pro came out and the Xbox Series came out, that really wasn't a thing. It was just starting because VRR, right, variable refresh rates, was just kind of becoming a thing on the TV side of things. Monitors have had this forever, which is why PC gamers have been able to take advantage of this for a long time. But in the consoles, typically games were locked at 30 FPS or 60 FPS. In which case, you really wouldn't see much of an update from a performance perspective, right? Well, now, in 2024 world, you can. Unlocked frame rates are pretty common. Not 100% across the board, but pretty common now. And you can really see and feel that difference. So that's a cool thing now. And I guess in how consoles have caught up in that way. But it means that a PS5 Pro can actually have more value and show more benefit in that regard, right? But we still have to wait for developers to actually do things like take advantage of the new features. If you want to see PSSR, okay, in a game, the developer needs to patch that. The same way when DLSS and FSR came out, developers needed to go and patch it to integrate and add those algorithms and upscaling techniques to the game. So PSSR is the same thing. But Game Boost is a thing, and we can see the benefit of that. A lot of games have DRS, dynamic resolution scaling, meaning that the resolution adjusts based on the workload on the GPU, usually. So you add a new GPU, guess what? You can push the resolution higher. A lot of games are benefiting from getting higher resolutions just from Game Boost. Boost mode is there. It's basically working across the board, especially if a game is unlocked, has VRR and all that kind of good stuff. You're going to get some really good benefits. So just keep that in mind. But I just thought it's interesting and just clarify for folks, like, console is still console. Getting a new GPU for your console, it's still going to require a lot more for the devs, because that's where the onus lies, right? The user, we can't control a lot, with a console. So, we're going to get some good ports, we're going to get some bad ports. So that leads me to the next thing about the PS5 Pro. Of course, there's been a lot of discussion around PSSR, Sony's new machine learning upscaler, which initially people just kind of thought would be this magic bullet that would always look better than FSR, AMD solution, right? And would get us closer to like DLSS on the PC side. Guys, that's not the case, obviously. And if you understood anything about how this stuff works, you wouldn't have expected that, right? DLSS came out in 2018. In its first iteration, there was only a handful of games that came out in the first year or so. It wasn't until the second iteration of DLSS, what they call DLSS 2.0, whatever, 2, with Ampere, which launched in 2020. That's when the model, the algorithm just improved so much that it was finally like, okay, we see that this is actually pretty cool. This is actually doing some stuff. The first version of DLSS for those first 2 years was pretty bad. And a lot of games looked worse when it was on. It took time for DLSS to develop. It took time for FSR to develop. PSSR is an infant, right? It is literally, a month old in the market. Developers have probably had access to it for probably less than a year at this point. I mean, it's still really, really early days. So a lot of it is just growing pains. It's a machine learning upscaling algorithm. This is complicated stuff. A lot of the issue we're hearing about with PSSR around shimmering, not playing well with ray tracing, RTAO, ambient occlusion, some GI. We see that some of the worst offenders for PSSR, Jedi Survivor, Dragon Age of Veilguard, Avatar, right? Frontiers of Pandora now, most recently. Even Alan Wake 2 to a certain extent. Call of Duty, Black Ops 6 launched with some artifacting, right? All of them have something in common. The artifact they manifest is a fizzle, this kind of weird shimmering and flickering around, like instability, literally. Like even when you're not moving, the camera's not moving, the player's not moving, the foliage is just doing this, right? Flickering and shimmering. What you're really seeing, guys, a lot of times is noise. And that's why we see it more prevalently with a lot of ray tracing games. Jedi Survivor, its foliage uses RTAO. Dragon Age Veilguard, its foliage uses RTAO, even in the performance mode. Silent Hill 2, of course, uses UE5, so it uses Lumen for the GI. That's a lot what we're seeing. It's noise. Now, the problem is that most temporal upscalers, like even DLSS before, FSR, even a lot of the custom bred stuff, even stuff like TAAU, they are not denoisers. They can upscale, they can do anti-aliasing, but they can't denoise an image. Now, denoising is something that's more needed when you have ray tracing, especially on console where the ray counts are so low. The lower the ray count, the more noisy the image is going to be, okay? And you need to have good denoising to get the image looking clear and clean, especially if you're talking about putting out a 4K image, right? You want something really high res, you need good denoising. The console space in general has been problematic in this way. There isn't really great denoising on console. Most developers wind up trying to do it themselves, and they're not a lot of great solutions there, to be honest, right? On the PC side, AMD has their own denoising. NVIDIA are probably the masters of denoising, and they have several solutions. And the most recently, they added DLSS 3.5, which added DLSS ray reconstruction. The reason why they added DLSS ray reconstruction, really the benefit that it gives you is exactly that. It gives you a denoising capability kind of built into DLSS. So while you're doing the super resolution part and the frame generation part potentially, now you can do a denoising within the same DLSS pass as opposed to it being something separate or not being present at all. And what you see with RR in a lot of cases is you'll see the ray trace reflection quality look that much cleaner now, right? You'll see some of the GI artifacting be completely removed because of that ray reconstruction, as they call it. That's the piece that's missing on console. Even before PlayStation 5 Pro, most of the ray tracing examples on if you know what to look for, and like me, that spends a lot of time looking at ray tracing on PC and such, the denoising was the biggest factor. It always just looked really, really noisy. If the developer was good, it was probably done in a certain way where you wouldn't notice it that much. I recently was looking back at like Callisto Protocol, for example, and Resident Evil Village. These games had very, very limited ray tracing, but it's in reflections and in materials at certain angles in a way where, again, in the motion of the game, you don't get a chance to really look up close at the quality and clarity of the reflection, right? But if you do, when I did, I kind of stopped and looked. I'm like, wow, you can see it. You see that same kind of fizzle, same kind of noise. Now, some games like Spider-Man from Insomniac, you can do that. You can rest the character, Spider-Man, on a building with a full mirror glass reflection and actually look at the reflection quality, right? So for them, the noising was really, really important. They could not have that same level of quality, the noising that I saw in like the Capcom games and in Callisto Protocol, for example. And so Insomniac prioritized that for their case, and they came up with a solution for themselves that had a denoising pass that was pretty darn good, which is why, by the way, PSSR in Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man Remaster games and Ratchet and Clank doesn't show those same artifacts, or at least not nearly to that extent, right? Because a lot of what that artifact is, it has to do with just a lot of noise. And Remedy's Northlight engine, they're not, which is why you needed the full path tracing in DLSSR on the PC side of Alan Wake for it to really look clean. Without that, a lot of reflection, even on PC, looks kind of noisy. Actually, if you really pay attention to it. On console, yeah, right, it's super noisy. Now, Remedy tried to outline how they did, their custom PS5 Pro solution to add in ray trace reflections, and they talked about denoising, right? They have a denoising pass, of course, they need it. but it clearly isn't really up to snuff compared to, something like the LSS-RR and, things that we would see on the PC side for sure. But a lot of it is that. And most recently, Digital Foundry in their weekly actually talked about, they talked to, the Call of Duty devs. And the Call of Duty devs was saying that. And they basically said that the artifact that's in Black Ops 6 was something that they were able to fix in less than a day. Like a half a day worth of work, they were able to fix it. So again, this stuff is resolvable. And they talked about the issue. The reason why it was there is because PSSR doesn't handle denoising. And they have denoising built into their engine, but they had to integrate, the overall frame has to be integrated in a way where PSSR and their denoising can play together, so the final output is a clean image that's upscaled by PSSR. And apparently, by default, initially, that wasn't the case. Okay, and and I guarantee you that that's not the case for a lot of these other games. Now, over time, could Sony, evolve PSSR similar to what NVIDIA did for DLSS to include a ray reconstruction type of thing? Absolutely. I wouldn't expect that in the next year even, probably. But over time, whether we see that for PS5 Pro later or more likely PS6, this won't be an issue, right, at all. Ray reconstruction is not a new thing. It's already out there. NVIDIA, already has it out. So you guarantee you're going to see Intel, AMD, and Sony and other people, Microsoft eventually, follow suit because it's really a key thing in terms of the overall upscaling and AI solution that you want to have. But for now, today, in most cases, it's still something that can be managed, but it would require some work for the game developer. And that's the problem. Like I said, the thing that's inexcusable is the lack of just QA. And most of these early patches are pretty much rush jobs. We know that, right? These are patches of just minimal effort getting it. And most of them. I mean, Alan Wake talked about they went into a little bit more detail. They went into a little bit more... some people might have taken a month or maybe a few months to get some of this stuff in, but obviously they're not trying to rewrite anything. They're not trying to change the engine and all this kind of stuff, right? And in some cases, to get PSSR to work well, you need to do that. But we've seen cases of it working well. Not just Sony first party, but we've seen it. We've seen it working well in a lot of games. I think it looks great in Hogwarts. It looks great in Stellar Blade. It looks fine. It looks really good in F1, for example, right? Most recently, we've seen the latest round of PS5 Pro patches has actually looked really good. And it actually makes me more optimistic and a lot of people more optimistic. In the past week or so, we've seen Black Myth Wukong finally get its PS5 Pro patch. We've seen Space Marine 2 finally get its PS5 Pro patch. We've seen Digital Foundry do analysis on the Resident Evil games and found out that Resident Evil Village and Resident Evil 4 Remake also uses PSSR. In all of those cases, PSSR looks great. All right, Space Marine 2 is transformative, almost to the level of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth level. And Black Myth Wukong looks way more clear and smooth in terms of the image and the noise and etc. So, maybe they're using the latest SDK, the latest version of PSSR, but these are, again, UE5 games in Black Myth Wukong, and I think UE4 Space Marine 2, and the Resident Evil games, they already had a pretty clean image, but apparently, they're using PSSR to upscale from a really low resolution, something sub 1080p, like 864p, which seems weird. Now, I played Resident Evil Village in its entirety on the PS5 Pro. All right, as part of my second playthrough, I just finished it a few days ago, and again, this is where pixel counts nowadays just really are fruitless exercises and can get you in trouble, because playing that game, I was amazed at times at how clean and clear the image looked. I literally stopped to just admire the environments several times when I was playing it. And I already played the game. The game was 3 years old. I played it before. I beat it on the base PS5. It clearly looked better than the base PS5. It looked cleaner, sharper, and of course it's running much higher frame rates. It's running generally in the 70s to 90 range. So it just felt great. It was honestly one of my favorite PS5 Pro experiences to date. And, turns out Digital Foundry, did their analysis, which I don't know. I feel like there still might be something going on there, but, they're saying, look, it's only 864p, which doesn't make sense because the base PS5 runs at a much higher resolution and still hits 60 or close to 60, even with RT on. So Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Capcom just was like, look, we see the results in PSSR. We're still getting pretty good results. We just reduce the resolution to get more performance headroom, all right? And then translate that into higher FPS, right? I don't know. But the game looks really, really clean. PSSR is doing some wondrous things in some recent updates. And these are, again, our heavy games that needed, a quote unquote upgrade the most. Black Myth and Space Marine 2. So I think the future is still pretty bright for PSSR, and again, a lot of the onus comes on the developers. My old take in it is, it is unfortunate. It's kind of one of those things that to some extent you kind of would think would come with the territory. The biggest and most egregious thing here to me is just the lack of just minimal QA. It seems for some of these developers, there's no way some of these games these patches should have released in the state that they were in. But for Sony's part, it'll get better for sure. I do agree, and this is the last piece I want to talk about here. Is I wanted to call out GT7. So GT7 did their patch before, since I did my initial video, and it's not perfect, but in a lot of ways, to me, it's the quintessential PlayStation Pro patch. And this is what I mean. What they essentially the dream for GT7, right? Was GT7 has some of the most advanced ray tracing on console, especially, that we have seen today. Okay, but the ray tracing was limited to outside of gameplay, outside of the actual racing. Okay, you saw it everywhere else in the game. You saw it in the menu, you saw it in escapes, the photo mode. You saw it in the garage when you were looking at the cars. You saw it in the pre-game stuff. You saw it in the replays, but not in the races, because the racing running at 60 frames per second was a bit too much for the base PS5. The ray tracing in the game in the base PS5 all ran at 30 frames per second. Okay, so the dream for the Pro was to be able to do the ray tracing in the races running at 60 frames per second. Okay, now could they do that? On the surface, it seems like they fell a little bit short on one hand, right? Because on one hand, it seemed like PSSR is being used, and even with the previews, we heard that the input resolution would drop a lot. The base game runs at native 4K, so we're like, okay, the game is already running at native 4K 60 on the base PS5. Adding an additional power, it should be able to push beyond that. You would think. I mean, what is beyond that? 8K? I don't know. 120 hertz? It already did that too on the base PS5, right? Like, where do we go? Adding ray tracing to that. That was the hope. Just adding the ray tracing, have it enabled in game. They use PSSR. Input resolution goes way down to something closer to 1080p, 12 something p, or whatever it is. So it's not native 4K. Now, the dream of PSSR is that it should be able to resolve a native 4K looking image. Now, in practice with GT7 with PSSR enabled, I'm going to tell you, the image quality definitely takes a hit. No question. And it looks lower res. It's a lot more aliasing, especially in certain maps, certain environments. And that's unfortunate. What PSSR gives you, though, is not only the full ray tracing suite on the bodies of the cars, the exterior of the cars, but when you go into cockpit view, you actually get full ray tracing in the cockpit view, which is really, really cool. And in some cases, it's transformative. It really is a game-changing thing. The problem is how much, even if you're in the cockpit view, for you to really see the difference, like most of the game, I've been playing GT7 for hours since the PS5 Pro update came out. And I mean, I have to look for it, but unless you're playing a certain time of the day, certain weather conditions, going through a tunnel or whatever, it really isn't that noticeable, quite frankly. It's not a huge difference, I'm going to be honest. Now, if you get that moment for those few seconds where you're going under the bridge, you see the lights bouncing and reflecting, it's like, wow, that's cool. Right, it is. But 98% of the actual gameplay experience you're seeing, you're not going to pay attention to it. You're not going to notice it that much. And if you don't play in the cockpit view, right, not a benefit. Now, you need to have PSSR enabled to get that. Why? Because they needed the lower input resolution to free up some GPU time to do that, because it turns out the interior ray tracing of the cockpit view is the more intensive thing. It's the more difficult thing for them to do in terms of GPU time and such. So they needed that. Now, if you disable PSSR in that game, essentially the game reverts back to that native 4K image using just basic TAA for anti-aliasing. But you now also still maintain the ray tracing on the bodies of the cars during races. So you drive past a car, you can see your car's reflection in the body of the car you pass. If you're behind a car with your headlights on at night, you can see your reflection in the car in front of you while still running at native 4K and maintaining that 60 frames per second. So did they actually achieve that goal? Yes, they did. But they realized in doing so that the ray tracing for the interior was still a bit much to keep that stable 60 frames per second. That's where PSSR comes in. But they smartly included the option to disable it. You can disable and enable. And in fact, a lot of Sony first-party studios add toggles to enable or disable PSSR, which is interesting. So if Sony first-party studios are acknowledging like, hey, this may not be for everybody, or hey, again, this isn't an across-the-board, improvement here, that says a lot, right? But, it's cool to still have the option. If you really enjoy the ray tracing effects, which a lot of people do, and they think it's fine, great. The game is still more than playable. It still looks awesome in that mode. But if you have been used to that native 4K crisp image, it definitely takes a hit from that. But you still can get the best of all worlds. 4K, full 4K, native 4K, 60 frames per second with ray tracing during races. And of course, now on the Pro, the replays and the rest of the game, the garage and everything now runs at 60 frames per second as well with ray tracing enabled. So they took the 30 frames per second mode with ray tracing, now running it at 60 frames per second and bringing it into the actual races. That's exactly what the Pro was supposed to do. If that were it, it would still be cool. And then they would have a disclaimer, oh, but ray tracing is not enabled for the interiors or whatever, right? Well, you can get that. You just need PSSR. They also, again, where I said, where do you go from native 4K? Guess what? You go to 8K. And they do have an 8K mode in there as well, right? That uses PSSR to do a reconstruction to 8K. Of course, it's not native 8K, but it's sharper than 4K, right? It's an 8K that requires an 8K TV to take advantage of. And then you still have the 120 hertz mode that pretty much run at a locked 120 if you really set it up. So it is not perfect. PSSR does have some issues where it detracts from the image in some cases, mostly just due to the lower input resolution that's being used there. But you do get a real transformative AB with the interior ray tracing. You do have the option to still toggle PSSR on and off, which is important. And you do get a push down to 8K and adding some new features. You do get the dream of real-time ray tracing in a 60 FPS racing game. Not just any racing game, but Gran Turismo, arguably the best looking racing game out there, especially on consoles. So there you go, man. That's a cool story. So I just wanted to highlight that because they did a lot, and the option is still important, and that's probably the best thing Sony can do in the short term. PSSR is going to evolve. It's going to get better. It's going to improve. In the short term, just give folks the option to either disable it or, again, to at least maintain the original base PS5 fidelity and performance modes, right? So you can still get the boost, still get the FPS boost, still get the dynamic resolution boost or whatever it is, and just use the old existing, reconstruction method, whether it's FSR or TAA or whatever. In some cases, unfortunately, that's actually preferred because PSSR is not delivering a clean image in the way that we wanted to. But again, it's not so much a fault of the technology itself. It is a baby, it is an infant, but it's really on the developer, right? And just quality control, man, right? There's no reason that Silent Hill 2 should have went out that way. And they'll figure it out. They're already, Call of Duty is supposed to be patching soon. They're going to fix it. Again, they already were able to fix their solution. Silent Hill 2 will probably be fixed. I think that, stuff like Dragon Age will probably be improved. I think Alan Wake 2, they already said they're working on further improvements. They're gonna do some stuff and fix it and make it even better. But it's not a smoking bullet, right? It's not a smoking gun. Now, does that mean that, it makes or breaks the PS5 Pro, justifying its cost and blah, blah, blah? I don't think so. There's still a lot of great examples of it, great looking games, and there's still the performance improvements, which, taking Call of Duty as an example, Call of Duty in the 60 hertz mode on PS5 Pro now, they increased the settings, they increased the ambient occlusion, they increased the shadows, they increased the global illumination quality. It looks better, no question. They increased the resolution. So it just looks sharper all around. But in the 60 hertz mode, the game now has a VRR setting on PS5 Pro only, not on base PS5, that allows the game to run above 60. I'm telling you guys, I'm playing through that campaign. I've been checking every level, looking at frame rate counters. It generally runs in the 80 to 100 FPS range. There was I don't want to spoil it, but there was at least almost a full level where the readout was just showing 120 the entire time. And I mean, I can feel it. I'm like, I had to keep checking. I'm like, wait, did I put the 120 hertz mode on? It's running in the 60 hertz mode at a almost locked 120 with the increased settings over the base, increased resolution over the base. I mean, that's a PS5 Pro. Now, it does have some artifacting from PSSR, which again is really not noticeable across the board. It's more noticeable in some scenes than others, and some maps than others, that kind of thing. It's there. But again, it doesn't like kill the game, like by any means. They're about to fix it. They're going to release a patch and it's going to be fixed. But what's there now, it still just looks phenomenal. It really does. And, you know, the combination of just like this uncompromised experience, this idea that you're getting superior resolution or fidelity with higher settings, higher resolution, with frame rates that are the performance mode or higher in a lot of cases. I'm playing Resident Evil Village, which is a game that I meant to replay for a while. And that game also runs, generally speaking, at 70 plus FPS across the whole game. Even in the worst case, it hits 100, surpasses 100 in a couple places, a couple areas. It just feels so smooth, buttery smooth to play. And I'm not usually like a huge frame rate, person like that. Like I need to have 100, 120, 100. No. Like I said, I play a lot of games at 30, and I'm still playing some games on a Pro at 30, by the way. I'm playing Jedi Survivor at 30, Final Fantasy 16 at 30, right? Because it just, to me, still feels pretty good. Callisto Protocol at 30, because it still feels fine in those kind of games. Those are really slow-paced games, so I'm cool. But, can't lie, right? If you have the option, playing these things at 100 plus with VRR, around 100 with getting increased fidelity, higher resolution, that's the best of all worlds. That in cases where the base PS5 couldn't deliver that, we're getting that on the Pro. I'm giving you a couple of examples, man. Like I said, GT7 native 4K with ray tracing, Resident Evil with the silky smoothness at 80, roughly 80, on average. Callisto Protocol with the 8K mode that's downsampled but still looks pristine, runs good at 30. Runs excellent at 60 and looks great at 60 as well. These are just some examples, and is ultimately delivering exactly what I want. The things that are issues will be improved, will be fixed, will be patched in most cases at least. But man, I literally want to play the game more since I got a Pro, because they just feel and look so good. Stellar Blade, oh my gosh. Stellar Blade has some amazing moments, like just the clarity, the colors, the detail. PSSR is used there, and it looks pristinely clean at some parts. Some parts, it depends on the environment, it depends on the map. It's weird. Some parts look super clean, some parts can look noisier. But again, I don't know if that's the game. It's probably the game, the engine, the map, the assets, more so than the PSSR and the Pro, because some parts of it look super clean. But overall, that game just feels so good in my hands. I really am enjoying Stellar Blade, man. I'm going to have more to say about that one. So anyway, that's all for now, man. I just wanted to give, like I said, some updated impressions. Things are not perfect there, but if had realistic expectations and knew what you were looking to get, PS5 Pro is delivering on that. I am still enjoying mine, still having a blast, and really very much looking forward to games to come, new patches coming out, and of course new games coming out next year that will have an option on the Pro. By the way, something like Indiana Jones, which already is announced to be coming out to PS5 next year on the Pro, man, it's not going to be full patch tracing on the PC. Again, we know that. I'm not comparing to that, but being able to get that on the Pro, man, that again, hopefully by that point, they have more time. Things will mature a bit on PSSR front. But assuming they can deliver all of that, it already runs at a pretty locked 60. They can add more ray tracing features on the Pro for sure. They can increase the resolution. And yeah, I expect to just see like a really good, clean 4K 60 with more ray tracing from the PC. Not full patch tracing, but just more ray tracing. That's basically what I would expect from that. But that's compelling. You can go through playing at 60. You get a probably higher quality RTGI with hopefully RT reflections at least. That's going to make that game shine for sure. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to 2025. But that's all for now. Thank you again. If you're watching, following, like, subscribe, please continue to support me for the end of the year, guys. Come on, I'm right there at 1,000 subscribers. So please help me out. Till next time, got a lot more interesting things, a lot more cool things I know you want to hear. So please keep an eye out for updates from me coming soon. So till next time, True Techno Gamer.